Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining right after lunch. I'm Scott Weiss. I'm the VP of Product Design at Babbel. I've been doing this kind of stuff for a long time. I started out a while back. My first job was at Apple, and I was an intern there. Went on to Microsoft, moved back to the Bay Area, worked for a startup. It was my first exit. It was a cool opportunity. Later moved to New York City, where I started an agency doing usability research, and back then it was called information architecture. And in 2007, I moved to London and tried my hand in a new country, and I've done it again. A couple of years back, I moved to Berlin. I've been there for 2.5 years, and I've learned a lot, and this talk is all about learning because I work for a learning company. I've called it the Ecology of UX, and by the end of the talk, you'll understand why I've linked ecology with user experience. Some of you have probably asked yourselves that question. And so I work for Babbel. I mentioned we're a language learning company. We teach 14 different languages in 7 display languages, but we just added another one. And conveniently, it's Polish. So it's 8 display languages. You can learn the 14 languages from those 8. And we have way over 1 million subscribers. We're not quite ready to announce the next milestone, but hopefully this year we'll hit 2 million. And those are paying subscribers. Those are people who are dedicated to learning with Babbel. We hope they learn every day, and that's the effort of my team and many others at Babbel. So let's see. Our mission is everyone learning languages. It's not a sentence. It's three separate concepts, and we start with everyone. So it's not for young people or old people or rich people or poor people. We try to make our solution available to everyone. And we're learning together. Not only do people learn with Babbel, but we learn from the people who learn with Babbel. We learn from each other. And I'm going to talk a lot about that today. We make a lot of mistakes, and I will show some of my own mistakes and those of my team. But every time we make a mistake, we learn from it. We brush ourselves off, and we pick ourselves up, and we do something different so that we can benefit our learners in a different way. And I love this slide because not just is it dogs and cats communicating on the hood of a car, but it's communicating across differences. A language really spans a difference. I've finally moved to a country where I don't speak the language, and I'm learning it slowly but surely. But the experience of using my mother tongue in a foreign land is very convenient for me, and it requires the confidence and inspiration of someone else to meet me halfway. But when I change the way I approach a problem by speaking to someone in their mother tongue, it's a completely different form of communication. And most of the people in this room, how many of you speak English as a mother tongue? Okay, yeah, it's a small percentage. And the rest of you are accommodating this international language called English. But when I go to a cafe and I order in German, I get a different kind of smile. Well, in Berlin, it's rarely a smile. But I get a different kind of reaction. And the same thing goes for the bank and the post office and the people at work. So that's what language learning is all about. And it is about seeing things differently. German is constructed very different to English. And once I started to understand the grammar, now I know that in speaking in German, one has to really think through what one wants to say before one opens their mouth. Because often the last word in a German sentence has the punchline, it has the real meaning. So it's incredibly rude to interrupt anyone, of course, but in German, if you interrupt somebody mid-sentence, you might not actually understand what they're really intending to say. And so this image here is it a pipe or is it a painting of a pipe? That's what it's about. So now we're going to talk a little bit about ecology in the traditional sense. So Yellowstone National Park was created in 1872 in the United States in Wyoming in the western edge, just about the western edge. It's an incredibly beautiful place. And it's home to a lot of nature, wild animals, both herbivores and carnivores, and predators. And one of those predators was the wolf. And the wolves were already in decline in 1872, but at that time, over the next 20, 40 years, by 1926, the wolves had been eradicated. It was before the Endangered Wildlife Act and before it was illegal to shoot anything you wanted to in the park. But parents didn't want their children getting snatched away by wild creatures, so it was okay to kill wolves. It was okay to kill coyotes. It was okay to kill bears. And what the wolves did, though, was that they did eat the elk. Elk are members of the deer family, but elk are, and people think of deer as Bambi, like super cute, lovely, furry creatures that are very timid. Well, they are, except they eat lots of yummy green stuff. And without the wolves to eat them and scare them away, they became a little bit lazy and cheeky, and they gathered in the valleys, and they started eating everything in sight. They ate not only the grass, but because they didn't need to go up into the hilly parts of the park, they also ate the shoots of young trees, cotton, wood, and aspen. And that started to change the environment. And the changes to the environment were that the young shoots weren't available to creatures that would eat them in the winter and creatures that would use them for other purposes. The beavers used to eat the young shoots of the trees, and they would take the branches and build dams in the water because there's a river that runs through the park. And that river without dams runs pretty quickly. But with dams, it would pool, and it would create spots with a little bit of shadow for the fish to gather, and then the birds that ate the fish would gather, and a lot of other things, a lot of other creatures needed that environment. But without the beavers and without these small plants, the ducks went because they would eat things that would gather, and the fish went. Partially they were eaten by the ducks, but they were gone too because they didn't have anywhere to collect. And the small rodents that would run around through the grass, they were gone too because they didn't have anywhere to run around and hide in. So their populations declined. And that all started to happen in 1926. These small changes had big impacts, and the park started to look a lot different. It started to look a little bit more like desert. You know, sure, it had a big river running through it, but you can see it looked a little bit more barren. And what, if anything, does this have to do with user experience? And of course, I'm glad that you asked that question, or rhetorically. And the first anecdote I'm going to tell you is how we burned our brand ambassadors. So Babbel is a German company. It is in its 11th year this year. And in those 11 years, we developed some very, very loyal customers. And most of those customers are German, and they've been with the company for a long time learning German. And there was a feature that we had in the product where learners could add their own words to the reviewing function. So learners' own words. And we refactor our code regularly. This is a developers conference. Developers understand refactoring, and so does everybody else, because it's that period of time when nothing new can happen, right? Because the code's being rebuilt from scratch. The outcome looks the same, the outputs look the same, but the code itself is being rebuilt from scratch. It's like rebuilding the framework of the building from the inside and keeping the facade. Well, in refactoring the review manager, the engineers realized that the code to support own words was really messy and convoluted. So we looked at the numbers, and we saw that only 3,000 people were using that feature, and we had lots and lots and lots of learners, more than 1 million at the time. So we thought, okay, 3,000 people, we can handle this. We informed customer service, and we cut the feature out. Well, the problem is, these were our most loyal customers, and they were really, really angry that we took this feature away. They called and they complained, and they wrote and they complained, and they went on online forums and they complained. And so our brand ambassadors being burned damaged our bottom line and damaged our credibility, and that really hurt us. The next example is when we did something seemingly small that had a different kind of impact. And Babbel took a lot of different payment methods, and in revisiting the payment processing, we realized that we didn't have that many people using PayPal, and all of the people using PayPal were sleepers. similar to joining a gym where you can join the gym and pay for it month to month to month and not go. The same thing happens with a subscription-based language learning app. And so we realized that these were sleepers. These were people whose annual subscription was renewing and they weren't using the product. And they were on PayPal, so we figured, okay, let's just scrap PayPal. They won't notice. Well, they did actually, and they called us, and we were able to move them to a different payment system. So that was a positive outcome from a removal from the product. We learned from three types of people. We learned from our customers. Those are people who buy the software. And we learned from prospects. Those are visitors or leads. Those are people who have expressed some sort of interest, either by visiting Babbel.com or going further and registering to try it out. And thirdly, we learned from proxies, which are people who match either of the two previous groups. So people who match in age and region and have some sort of expressed interest in language learning most of the time and sometimes not. And we get those in various ways, but we do different types of research with them. We do, and we reach them in different ways, and we get information from them in different ways. Customers and prospects both use customer service function. Customers might complain about something or request a feature. Prospects might inquire about a different type of membership and what it offers. Customers will also, and proxies, not proxies, but prospects will also do App Store reviews. We get a lot of information that way. We do user research with all three types, and I'll talk about the different types of user research and how that plays out. One of those types is surveys, and another type is user research. This is classical usability testing. We don't actually do testing like this at Babbel anymore. You might ask why I showed a slide of it, and it's because it's hard to really show a slide of people using Validately. Validately is one mechanism for remote user testing. We do all of our usability research remotely now. Live moderated, but remotely executed. So our offices are in Berlin and New York, and both of those cities are not representative of the nation or region that they're in. So Berlin is very, very different to any other city in Germany. I like to refer to Berlin as wonderful chaos. Well, people don't think of Germany as a chaotic place. And New York City is very different from other cities in the United States. So if our offices are there and we're doing in-person research, we're going to get research results based on the people we're able to bring in. And one thing that we used to do is that when we wanted to study people who represented the American market, is we would interview people who were American expats. And that's a big mistake because most Americans don't have passports, let alone move to Berlin and participate in research. So now we use Validately, and we use different types of recruiting mechanisms. We often recruit directly from our own landing pages for visitors and leads and customers. The proxies, we have to go externally. We've used respondent.io. We've used other types of services to find the proxies. But we find that doing this video research, we don't have to do a video setup. We don't have to schedule people to come in. We just have to schedule them to do the research from their own home. But we get a certain amount of data from that. It's qualitative data. It's incredibly rich data, but not lots of data points. So we can't draw trends. We don't cite the answers from one-on-one usability research in terms of percentages. I always ask if it's one out of what? It's 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 6 when we do reporting. But that's one-on-one usability research, one type that we do. Another type of research that we do is surveys. And this sequence is an example of a survey that we did right after I joined the company. We were doing a rebranding effort. Our brand team had worked with an external agency and come up with some new colors and new typography, new textures, but they added 2 brand descriptors. The existing brand descriptors, the pre-existing ones, were practical and geeky. So Babbel is a very practical bit of software. It was made in Germany by really clever Germans, and it was really matter of fact. It got to the point. Our brand colors were black and white and gray and orange. And you can see that on the left, I think. The clicker works, sort of. But you can see it on the left. So on the right side, we added 2 new descriptors which were expressive and lighthearted. And so how do you make this landing page for signed-in users expressive and lighthearted? So we used the new color, or one of the new colors, which is this almost purpley blue. And we used the new font, which is a newspaper-styled font called Litura. And I was a little nervous because it was a little bright and a little bit, it was hard to understand the information hierarchy in the image on the right. So I said, well, why don't we do some preference testing with non-users? And so we ran it in the United States and in Germany. We wanted to see which one people liked better. Now remember, these are not Babbel customers. These are complete strangers to Babbel. And we found out that people liked the old one better. And that was a bummer. But then we were like, okay, well, what about the demographics of this group? It was only 50 people. They spent about a minute looking, and it's just, which one do you like better and why? And half of that group, we asked, we showed them the purpley one first, and the other half, we showed the original one first. So we got good data. But then when we looked at the demographics, we got this recognizable image, the middle finger. But it was our target market. And sometimes you get jolted by that. And remember, this is in my first couple of weeks at Babbel. So we tried it again with electric, a fresher looking, more modern image. We changed the navigation bar at the top from black to white, and we got the same result. So we did it again, and it happened again. See, they keep preferring the old one. Now, sort of midway through this, I found out that we were actually running the research again and again, and we missed a tick box in the research tool that required that we get new sample every time. So we were asking the same people, which is kind of embarrassing. Then we fixed it. We fixed that. We caught that. The research cost double as a result, but it was well worth it. And Blur, we really loved it when we put it out there, because you can see we took the image and then we stretched it and blurred it in the background. That was, nice effect. But so then we tried something else, Rainbow, and look, this one really bombed. And then did we try it again? Oh yeah, we tried it with light, and that bombed too. Remember, this is my first couple of weeks at Babbel. I'm in probation. Like, I'm nervous at this point. Actually, not that nervous. But so then we went really conservative, and you can see the new one on the right. And in case you're not sure what the difference is, I've circled it for you. We used the new logo, which loses the teardrop shape, and we also changed the shape of the flag from rectangular to round, just because we thought it was nicer. There was no reason. We didn't do preference testing on this one because we didn't really want to find out. But the lesson that we learned from this sequence of surveys was that it is, you can't apply brand like lipstick. It doesn't work that way. Brand has to be designed from within. Yeah, a brand is more than just a basic appearance change. So we spent a couple more months, and we really thought about the brand and how we could express it and how we could bring it through. And what you see on the right is closer to what we're shipping today. We've evolved it further since, but what we did was we used the material design framework to put things in cards. We tightened it up. We got rid of the welcome back message. Even though we really want them to feel welcome, we wanted to use that space more wisely and put more information to show them more of what they could do with the software. And we keep making changes like that. But that's another example. So I talked at first about one-on-one testing and then surveys. And then the next one is analytics. So we were doing a new project, a totally new concept, and we were running a beta program. And in order to invite people to try out the beta, we sent them a bunch of emails saying, hey, can you try out our beta? And we tracked them by age group. And the headline here says, millennials don't read much spam. So look at the blue and the yellow bar. So first, it's the email was delivered. We sent it to a lot more boomers than millennials. But then when you look at the open rate, look at the ratios there. Almost 9% of the opens, 9% of the boomers opened it, and 3% of the millennials opened it. So now we know that millennials don't look as much as the boomers at their email. And then when we went down to the click rate, we got a 3% click rate from millennials and a more than double, 7.6% click rate from the boomers. And that's of the previous batch. It was actually less than 1% if you take 90 out of 20,000 and 671 out of 43,000. So that's interesting, but not groundbreaking. So we went a little bit further. And then we looked at what they did. We asked them some questions in Spanish and asked them to answer them. And we looked at the data and said, okay, what can we learn from this? And if you look at the bottom comparison, the bottom comparison on the left and on the right, and you look at the ratios of the yellow to the green. So yellow is the answered, and green is the answered right. And so we saw that the millennials actually performed better than the boomers. You know, okay, they're younger, maybe they've studied the language more recently. So that's a conclusion that you could derive from the data, because the questions that you ask aren't necessarily the answers that you get. You get data as an answer, and you have to figure out the causality. So we did that, and that was kind of interesting. It wasn't actually what we were looking for. You can see in some of those cases the yellow is bigger than the blue, and sometimes people answered questions twice. Don't know why, fault of the project. But then we went further, and we compared subscribers to leads. Now again, these are just the boomers, not again, but these are just the boomers. But you can see that the subscribers actually performed a little bit better than leads, and lo and behold, Babbel works. It means that people who study with Babbel can answer questions in Spanish if they're studying Spanish, I hope. But that was interesting. So analytics can tell you some things. And we did a lot of other stuff with analytics. We were, is a new concept in language learning that we came up with to be neither too hard nor too easy. We did some adjustability with the lessons behind the scenes to serve up what we felt was just hard enough or just easy enough for people. And the metric we were trying to compare to was learning goal 1 completion rates. And learning goal 1, when you try out Babbel, you can take a free lesson. And that's learning goal 1. And in the new product, we had them do the same thing. And about 60% of the people finish it. When they go to a search engine and they type in, I want to learn Spanish, and they go all the way through it, about 60% complete on Babbel. And so we had to hit that metric with our new experimental project, which was really hard to do because we spent 10 years optimizing the core product that we've got. So creating something new that would work just as well was really hard. And we realized that pretty far in. And you know, a lot has changed in that project. My next year, I'll talk more about that. So we're going to come back to Yellowstone for a little while. And so the wolves were all killed off in 1926. And 69 years later, in 1995, they were reintroduced. And 14 of them were put back into Yellowstone. And I'd ask you, what do you think would happen? But you don't have the microphone, so I'll have to tell you. But pretty quickly, the elk scattered. They went up into the hill areas and had to eat stuff that was slightly less tasty, but it was better than being eaten or mauled by the wolves. And then the beavers came back because within a couple of years, you know, like every season, the aspen and the cottonwood would grow back. And in the next season, some of it grew back, and the beavers were, you know, there were still a few around. They didn't become extinct. So they came around, and they started building dams again, and then the fish would collect again. Because, again, these species weren't extinct. They were just massively diminished. And the bunnies came back. Actually, the bunnies were mostly eaten by the coyotes. But the coyotes aren't really super greedy eaters. But then when the wolves came back, they actually fought with the coyotes, and they won. The coyotes could survive better up in the hills than down in the valleys. Because the wolves were really fast in the valleys, but the coyotes were faster because they're much more lightweight when they were up in the hills. That's another bit of ecology trivia. But so small things like 14 wolves could change an entire landscape. All of Yellowstone really, really came back to life. It's you know, verdant and green and richly populated with different species. And there is now a conspiracy theory that it wasn't really about the wolves, but I'm not going to go into that because conspiracy theories aren't nearly as interesting as this kind of story. But it isn't just about preventing crises. Sometimes you can do positive things that have bigger effects. Not just fixing problems or breaking things and seeing what the results are. But the next couple of stories are about positive things. And you can change the outcome with seemingly small things. And in this case, we're going to talk about customer service. A colleague came to me and said, hey, Scott, the Android app, we don't have the frequently asked questions. And his theory, Temi gave a talk, I think it was just before lunch. She was talking about hypotheses and hunches and data-driven decisions. And I really like that talk because this is one of those cases where Stefan came to me and he said, hey, why don't we put the frequently asked questions in the Android app? And I'm like, okay, that's a good idea. And then I went to a product manager and said, hey, why don't we put the frequently asked questions in the Android app? And the product manager's answer was, well, if we've got a certain amount of engineering effort, we would rather put in a new feature that we can talk about and that would make learners really happy than just putting in, some access to customer service. And I thought that that was a reasonable argument, but I also really felt for Stefan, who realized that the company was growing and he didn't want to just have to keep hiring tons and tons more customer service people. He wanted to serve our customers better, and he felt that the frequently asked questions would do that. So we actually did. We put the frequently asked questions in the Android apps, and people could get answers to their questions immediately, at least the basic ones. And they could look up other things just because they were curious. And so then, again, we looked at analytics data, and what happened? Okay, so it was done in June, and you don't actually have to look too hard. You can see the lines, and you've got a cliff on the left, and what is that? We dropped 10,000 requests per month. That means email or calls. And we increased access from almost nothing. You can see the rumbles at the lower left there. Those are just the test accounts going through the frequently asked questions. But we got up to 80,000 frequently asked question requests per month, and that's like an 8-to-1 ratio. What does that mean? That means that either we can improve them and make them better and more readable, or people are learning more stuff before they find their answers. But that was a great success story. So we've learned a few things today. One of them is that you can do research in many ways. You can do research with one-on-ones. You could do it with surveys. You could do it with analytics. And you could do it with customers, proxies, and prospects. And the outcomes could be negative things can have negative results. Negative things can have positive results, which is a really nice surprise, but doesn't happen quite so often. And also you can do proactive things to make a big difference. And I have some time for questions. Thank you. Who would like to go first? Does anybody have any questions? If you don't have any questions, then you get an extra few minutes of break. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Scott.